For me as a director, was to sort of embrace the spirit of...
They say Ron Howard is too nice to make enemies. And yet for a man who built his career on kindness, humility, and quiet brilliance, even he couldn't escape Hollywood's darker side. For decades, Ron has directed some of the biggest stars on earth, and from Tom Hanks to Russell Crowe, navigating egos, tempers, and scandals that would drive most directors out of the business. But behind that calm, red-haired smile is a man who's seen it all. The clashes, the betrayals, and the rare moments that tested his patience to the breaking point, because even the nicest man in Hollywood has limits. Throughout his career, Ron has spoken about certain actors and moments that haunted him, not because they ruined his movies, but because they revealed just how fragile the balance between genius and chaos can be. These aren't just difficult performers. These are the ones who crossed lines, broke trust, and changed him forever. Some were co-stars from his early television days. Others were megastars who made life on set unbearable. But all of them share one thing in common. They forced Ron Howard to confront the one truth he'd avoided for years, and that being kind doesn't always mean being respected. From the jealousies of Happy Days to the public scandals of The Dilemma, these stories peel back the curtain on the man who defined decency in an industry built on ego. This is the untold truth of the 6 people Ron Howard once described as the hardest, and at times, the most evil, he ever worked with. It's hard to overstate just how iconic Happy Days was in the 1970s. For millions of Americans, it was more than a sitcom, it was comfort television. And at the heart of it were 2 faces everyone loved. Ron Howard's Richie Cunningham and Henry Winkler's Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli. But while viewers saw 2 best friends on screen, behind the cameras a quiet storm was brewing. Ron Howard was already a household name when Happy Days premiered in 1974. As the former child star of The Andy Griffith Show, he was used to being the center of attention. The wholesome, clean-cut Richie was designed to be the show's moral compass, the everyman the audience related to. Then came Henry Winkler. At first, his leather-jacketed Fonzie was meant to appear in just a handful of episodes. But something unexpected happened. America fell in love with him. The cool motorcycle-riding bad boy wasn't supposed to be the lead, yet week after week, the cheers from the studio audience grew louder. By season 3, Fonzie fever had taken over. Fan mail flooded in, more than 80% of it addressed to Winkler. Executives noticed, writers noticed, and Ron Howard noticed most of all. He later admitted that it was a strange feeling watching the spotlight shift. In the early seasons, Richie was the focus of nearly every episode, he recalled. But suddenly the writers were building entire storylines around Fonzie. It was like watching the show I knew turn into something else. Reporters began asking uncomfortable questions. Do you feel like a supporting actor on your own show? Howard handled it gracefully, but inside he was struggling. It wasn't jealousy in the petty sense. It was fear of losing control over something he'd helped build. The tension came to a head in 1975 when ABC executives floated a shocking idea. Rename the series Fonzie's Happy Days. Winkler was horrified. I told them absolutely not, he later said. It would insult the cast and the audience. But for Ron, it was deeper than that. He told producers that if they changed the name, he'd walk. I'll quit the show and go back to film school, he said flatly. I mean it. That was a bold statement for a 21-year-old actor under contract with one of TV's biggest networks. But it worked. The executives backed off. The show stayed Happy Days. Not long after, Winkler and Howard finally confronted the elephant in the room. During a shoot in Arizona, Winkler climbed into Ron's Volkswagen after filming and asked, "Are you okay with how things are going?" Ron didn't hesitate. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "You're doing great work. I'm proud of you. I just had to get over it." That moment changed everything. Winkler later said it cemented their lifelong friendship. That's who Ron is. Honest, humble, and bigger than the business. Decades later, they'd reunite on Arrested Development, proving that whatever early tension existed had evolved into deep respect. Ron even said, "My time on Happy Days was great because of the people I worked with, especially Henry. It was a story of rivalry turned respect, a reminder that even when fame plays favorites, integrity can outlast ego." Fast forward to 2010. Ron Howard is no longer the young actor from Happy Days. He's an Academy Award-winning director known for emotional storytelling and clean reputation. Then comes The Dilemma, a buddy comedy starring Vince Vaughn and Kevin James. The movie seemed harmless enough until its first trailer dropped. In the very first scene, Vaughn looks into the camera and says, "Electric cars are gay." Within hours, the internet exploded. Advocacy groups condemned it. CNN's Anderson Cooper called it offensive and dangerous. Universal panicked and pulled the trailer. And suddenly, Ron Howard, Hollywood's nicest guy, was in the middle of a PR nightmare. Executives wanted the line gone. Publicists wanted an apology. But Howard saw it differently. The line, he argued, wasn't about mocking anyone. It was about portraying Vaughn's character, a brash, impulsive man who speaks before thinking. "It defines who he is," Howard wrote in an open letter to the Los Angeles Times. The response was mixed. Some praised Howard's defense of creative freedom. Others accused him of tone deafness. On morning shows, panels debated whether intent excused impact. Then Vaughn made things worse. "Comedy is about laughing at our differences," he told reporters, a statement that poured gasoline on the fire. The controversy overshadowed the entire film. Vaughn's reputation took a hit, and The Dilemma bombed at the box office. Critics called it out of touch and awkwardly insensitive. Howard barely spoke of it afterward. When asked years later, he simply said, "Every controversy fades." But behind that calm response, industry insiders say the ordeal rattled him. It was the first time in his career that Ron's image of universal likability was tested, and he realized how quickly Hollywood's mood could shift. Still, true to form, he stood by his cast and his principles, proving once again that integrity sometimes means standing in the storm alone. By 1995, Ron Howard was a respected director, but one event that year changed everything, and not in the way he expected. Apollo 13 was a triumph. 9 Oscar nominations, rave reviews, global acclaim. Yet when nominations for Best Director were announced, Howard's name was missing. The industry was stunned. That year, Mel Gibson won for Braveheart. Years later, when Howard finally won for A Beautiful Mind, fate came full circle. Gibson was the one presenting the award. Days before the Oscars, Mel told him backstage, "I'm going to give you an Oscar, buddy." Ron laughed, thinking it was typical Gibson bravado. But when Gibson opened the envelope that night and read Howard's name, the room erupted. Ron turned around in disbelief and asked to see the card himself. Sure enough, there it was, his name printed in bold. That moment said everything about his humility. Even in triumph, he doubted it until he saw proof. Though he never spoke negatively about Gibson, insiders recall tension during their 1996 collaboration on Ransom. Mel's intensity and unpredictability clashed with Howard's measured precision. Still, Howard handled it with professionalism, earning Gibson's respect in the process. It was a rare pairing of fire and calm, one that left Howard both exhausted and enlightened. Hollywood is obsessed with youth and spectacle. Back to the Future. The Goonies and Cocoon. Ron Howard, then only 31, directs a story about aging and renewal. His cast, seasoned veterans led by Wilford Brimley, the tough-as-nails cowboy actor known for his no-nonsense attitude. From day one, they clashed. Brimley believed in instinct. Ron believed in control. The biggest fight came during the scene where the elderly characters discover the rejuvenating pool. Ron wanted big reactions, awe, joy, disbelief. Brimley refused. "Old men don't act like kids," he grumbled. He played it quiet, subtle, against direction. The take was unusable. The reshoot cost nearly $200,000. Crew members recalled Brimley throwing a mug once, cursing at an assistant director, and snapping, "I've been old all my life. Son, I don't need your advice on how to play it." Ron, ever composed, would step outside to calm down. He never yelled, a cinematographer said, but you could see it in his eyes and he was boiling. Yet despite the chaos, Cocoon became a hit, winning 2 Oscars. Brimley later admitted, "Ron was right more than I was. Their working styles couldn't have been more different, but the outcome proved Howard's quiet discipline could turn even the most stubborn performance into gold." For all his patience, compassion, and decency, Ron Howard's journey through Hollywood hasn't been free of storms. Each name, Winkler, Vaughn, Gibson, Brimley, represents a moment that tested his kindness, challenged his professionalism, and revealed what grace under pressure truly looks like. He's faced jealousy, controversy, defiance, and disrespect. Yet through it all, he never lashed out, never lost control, and never stopped believing that good work speaks louder than pride. In an industry built on chaos, Ron Howard stands as proof that success doesn't have to come at the expense of character. And maybe that's why, even after decades of fame, his legacy remains spotless. Because for Ron, the hardest people were never his enemies. They were his teachers. When Ron Howard signed on to direct How the Grinch Stole Christmas in 1999, he knew it would be one of his most ambitious projects yet. A massive set, heavy prosthetics, elaborate lighting, and at the heart of it all, one of Hollywood's most unpredictable performers, Jim Carrey. Carrey was a superstar, coming off hits like The Mask and Ace Ventura. His energy was electric, his comedy limitless, but the Grinch would push both men to their limits. The challenge began with the makeup. Every morning, Carrey spent nearly 8 hours in the chair, glued, painted, and wrapped in green fur. The process was so grueling that on day one, Carrey ripped off his mask and stormed off set. It felt like being buried alive, he later said. Ron Howard tried everything to calm him down: empathy, humor, even compromise. But Carrey's frustration only grew. The studio had to bring in a Navy SEAL who specialized in surviving torture to teach Carrey breathing and focus techniques just so he could tolerate the costume. Even then, filming was chaos. Carrey would improvise endlessly, sometimes ignoring direction, changing lines mid-scene, or disappearing between takes. "He's brilliant," Howard told crew members, "but it's like trying to catch lightning with a butterfly net." In one moment of exhaustion, Ron reportedly stepped off set, disappeared for 15 minutes, and returned, dressed head to toe in a Grinch costume. The crew burst out laughing. So did Carrey. The tension broke instantly. From then on, they found a rhythm. Howard learned to let Carrey's madness lead, shaping the movie around his energy rather than trying to contain it. The result? A box office hit, an Oscar for makeup, and one of the most iconic Christmas films of all time. Years later, Carrey would admit, "I was awful to work with." But Ron never cracked. He's the only director who could have survived me. For Howard, the experience was both agony and triumph, proof that even the most uncontrollable storms can produce masterpieces if the captain refuses to panic. By the mid-1990s, Ron Howard and Tom Hanks were Hollywood's golden duo. Splash, Apollo 13, The Da Vinci Code. They trusted each other completely. But even perfect partnerships have breaking points. During Angels and Demons in 2008, tensions quietly surfaced. The sequel to The Da Vinci Code carried enormous expectations. The Vatican objected to its content, protesters surrounded the filming locations, and security was a nightmare. Hanks, ever the perfectionist, wanted constant rewrites. Howard, juggling studio pressure and location bans, just wanted to keep the schedule alive. Crew members later recalled days when the two would huddle behind closed doors for hours, debating tone and dialogue. It wasn't shouting. It was something colder. Two friends fighting with silence. In one particularly grueling week in Rome, Howard reportedly scrapped an entire day of footage after Hanks disagreed with the emotional direction of a scene. The delay cost $1.2 million. Still, Ron stood by his star. "If Tom says he needs it, he probably does," he told producers. That trust paid off. Hanks's performance was universally praised, but it wasn't easy. The strain of constant reshoots left Howard physically exhausted. "It was the hardest film I've ever made," he said later. Every frame was a battle between faith and fear. After the shoot, the two didn't speak for several months, not out of anger, but mutual burnout. When they reunited for Inferno years later, both men joked about it. "We survived Angels and Demons," Hanks said. That's proof friendship can outlast anything. Behind the smiles, though, it was a reminder that even the strongest creative bonds are fragile, and that sometimes the hardest people to direct are the ones you love most. When Ron Howard cast Michael Keaton in The Paper, 1994, the actor was at a crossroads. He'd just stepped away from Batman after 2 blockbuster hits, and Hollywood was unsure what to do with him next. Howard saw potential. He wanted to show a side of Keaton no one had seen: grounded, human, vulnerable. But Keaton wasn't ready to let go of the manic energy that made him famous. From day one, creative friction flared. Howard preferred structured rehearsals. Keaton thrived on chaos. He'd deliver takes that were completely different from one moment to the next. Brilliant but unpredictable. In one scene, Keaton was supposed to argue with his editor calmly. Instead, he jumped onto a desk mid-shot and improvised an entire monologue that wasn't in the script. Howard called cut and the crew applauded. The problem? Continuity was destroyed, and the scene had to be reshot. Howard admired Keaton's brilliance but struggled to contain it. "He's like jazz," Ron told an assistant. "You can't direct him, you just play along." The tension peaked one night when they argued over a camera angle. Keaton wanted the shot close, intense. Ron wanted distance, to show the chaos of the newsroom. They went back and forth for 20 minutes until Howard finally said, "Michael, I promise, and if I'm wrong, I'll reshoot it your way." They did it Ron's way. It stayed in the movie, and it worked. After the premiere, Keaton reportedly turned to Howard and said, "You were right. Damn it." Years later, during interviews, Keaton called Howard the most patient man in Hollywood. Howard smiled and replied, "Michael doesn't make it easy, but he always makes it worth it." It was another reminder that greatness often lives on the edge of chaos, and Ron Howard has learned to walk that edge better than anyone. Ron Howard's story isn't just about directing movies. It's about directing people, from the fiery tempers of actors like Brimley and Carey to the silent tension with legends like Hanks and Keaton. Every experience has shaped the man behind the camera. He's learned that leadership isn't about control. It's about compassion. That every tantrum hides insecurity, and every ego hides fear. Hollywood has plenty of talented directors, but few have survived its storms with their humanity intact. Ron Howard did, not because he avoided conflict, but because he faced it with kindness. And maybe that's the real secret to his success. Not the Oscars, not the box office, not the fame, but the quiet strength to stay good in a business that rewards cruelty. Because in the end, the hardest people weren't the ones who challenged his authority. They were the ones who tested his heart. And through it all, Ron Howard never stopped being the same soft-spoken redhead who just wanted to tell stories. Honestly, humbly, and with heart. When Ron Howard first met Russell Crowe, he saw what most directors feared and admired in equal measure: raw, unfiltered intensity. Crowe was fresh off his Gladiator Oscar win, unpredictable and notoriously difficult on set. But Howard had a vision. He believed that if anyone could channel Crowe's volcanic energy into something human, it was him. That belief was put to the test on A Beautiful Mind. From the beginning, Crowe resisted the idea of portraying John Nash as fragile. "I'm not playing a victim," he told Ron on day one. "I'm playing a man who's fighting for control." Ron respected that, but he also needed the vulnerability, the trembling hands, the lost gaze, the silence that spoke more than dialogue. Their creative tug-of-war defined the shoot. One morning, after a particularly tense take, Crowe slammed his script shut and said, "You want weakness, Ron, but this man was a giant." Ron quietly walked over, crouched beside him, and said, "Yes, but even giants kneel when they're tired." For the first time, Crowe didn't argue. He just nodded, then walked back to the set. That take, quiet, shaking, almost childlike, became one of the film's most haunting moments. Behind closed doors, producers worried that Crowe's temper might boil over. But Howard handled it the only way he knew how, with calm honesty. "Russell's fire is what makes him great," he told Universal. "I'd rather tame a storm than chase a breeze." Their collaboration won Oscars and critical acclaim. Years later, Crowe would reunite with Howard for Cinderella Man, where their mutual respect blossomed. "Ron's the only director I never wanted to disappoint," Crowe said. For a man famous for shouting matches, Crowe never raised his voice to Howard again. Because respect, once earned through patience, becomes unbreakable. Paul Bettany first worked with Ron Howard on A Beautiful Mind. He played Charles, Nash's mysterious roommate. Charming, witty, and, as it turned out, imaginary. It was a small but vital role, and it marked the beginning of one of Howard's most intellectually challenging partnerships. Unlike Crowe, Bettany wasn't fiery. He was analytical, endlessly curious, sometimes to the point of frustration. He questioned everything. Every line, every gesture, every camera angle. On the Da Vinci Code, this habit drove the crew crazy. Bettany played Silas, the albino monk assassin, a character defined by faith and fanaticism. But Bettany wanted to understand why. Why does he whip himself here, Ron? What's his theology? Is he punishing sin or chasing transcendence? Ron admired the questions at first, but filming was running behind, and every conversation added minutes, then hours. At one point, after yet another deep philosophical debate mid-shoot, Howard smiled wearily and said, "Paul, if we discuss this any longer, the sun will rise in the next scene." Bettany burst out laughing, broke character, and apologized. Despite the challenges, their dynamic created magic. Bettany's performance was mesmerizing, terrifying yet soulful. The pain in his eyes was real because he'd wrestled with every moral shade of the character. After the Da Vinci Code, Bettany told Empire magazine, "Ron Howard is the calmest man I've ever met. He makes chaos feel safe." Howard returned the compliment years later. "Paul's the rare kind of actor who digs so deep. You have to remind him to come up for air." It wasn't an easy relationship, but it was one built on mutual curiosity, and it taught Howard something profound, that the most difficult actors aren't always defiant. Sometimes, they're just chasing truth too far. By 2015, Ron Howard had directed every kind of performer: rebels, perfectionists, comedians, thinkers. But when he cast Cate Blanchett in The Missing, he met a new kind of challenge: quiet power. Blanchett wasn't loud or volatile. She was precise, surgical, and fearless. Her eyes could shift from warmth to fury in a single breath. Howard admired that, but it also terrified him. The Missing was a dark western about loss and revenge. Blanchett played a frontier mother searching for her kidnapped daughter, opposite Tommy Lee Jones. The emotional weight of the story was immense, and Blanchett carried it like a boulder. During filming, she'd often do entire takes in silence, letting only her expression convey the agony. It was breathtaking, but it also confused Ron's camera team. "How do we light pain that doesn't move?" he once asked his cinematographer. Blanchett didn't always agree with Ron's restraint. She wanted more grit, more realism, less polish. "These people wouldn't look clean," she told him during a night shoot. "They'd smell like sweat and fear." Ron agreed, to a point. He had to balance art with audience expectations. "You're right," he said, "but sometimes we have to let the camera smell instead of the viewer." Blanchett didn't argue. She just nodded, walked away, and delivered a take so raw it left the crew speechless. After the final cut, Howard called it the most emotionally draining film I've ever made. Blanchett later admitted that she pushed Ron hard, but it was out of respect. He listens. That's rare. Their collaboration became a study in contrasts, her fire against his calm, her chaos against his structure, and once again, Howard proved what the industry already knew. Even the strongest storms bow to still water. Decades into his career, Ron Howard's legacy isn't defined by conflict. It's defined by grace under fire. He's directed legends, rebels and dreamers, and each one has tested a different part of him. Winkler tested his humility. Crowe tested his endurance. Carey tested his sanity. Blanchett tested his precision. But through it all, he never raised his voice. Never humiliated anyone. Never forgot that every performance, and no matter how difficult, comes from a place of passion. Maybe that's why people still line up to work with him. Because deep down, even the most impossible actors know one thing: Ron Howard will never stop believing in them. In Hollywood, where egos clash and tempers flare, that belief is rare and priceless. And as the credits of his life's work continue to roll, one truth remains clear. Ron Howard didn't just survive the chaos of Hollywood, he mastered it. By the mid-1990s, Ron Howard and Tom Hanks were already a dream duo. Together, they'd made splash in Apollo 13, two films that defined a generation. But their bond wasn't just built on friendship, it was forged through fire. When Apollo 13 began production, Hanks was riding a career high after Forrest Gump. Studios saw him as untouchable. Ron, ever the craftsman, didn't care about hype. He cared about truth. He wanted Hanks to play astronaut Jim Lovell not as a hero, but as a man afraid of failing in front of the world. That request didn't sit easily with Hanks. He believed Lovell's strength came from his composure. "He's not scared, Ron," Hanks said. "He's steady. Always steady." Howard paused. "Tom," he said quietly, "even steady men look out the window and see darkness." For a moment there was silence. Then Hanks smiled, that half grin that means he's just been outplayed. From that day forward, he trusted Ron completely. Still, the shoot was grueling. NASA consultants hovered over every detail, and Ron's obsession with realism pushed everyone to the edge. He insisted the cast film in zero-gravity aircraft to simulate space conditions. 612 parabolic dives over 2 weeks. Hanks threw up so many times he joked he'd lost half his lines in the vomit bags, but Ron never apologized for his perfectionism. "The story deserves it," he'd say. "History deserves it." When Apollo 13 premiered, it wasn't just a triumph of filmmaking. It was a testament to two men who refused to compromise art for comfort. Years later, when asked why he kept returning to work with Howard on the Da Vinci Code, Angels and Demons, and Inferno, Hanks gave the simplest answer: because Ron never lies. He tells you when you're good and he tells you when you're not, and somehow you thank him both times. It wasn't always easy, but that's what made their partnership iconic. Two perfectionists bound by truth. On the set of How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Ron Howard faced chaos unlike anything he'd seen before. And its name was Jim Carrey. Carrey had just come off a string of massive hits, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, Liar, Liar, and was Hollywood's comedy king. But The Grinch wasn't just another laugh fest. It was a psychological marathon trapped inside a green fursuit. The costume took 8 hours to apply. The yellow contact lenses burned his eyes. The fake hair itched constantly. By day 2, Carrey was having panic attacks. He smashed props, stormed off set, and screamed that he couldn't breathe. Howard tried to calm him, but nothing worked, until one day he showed up in full Grinch makeup himself. Carrey stared at him dumbfounded. "What are you doing?" Howard, muffled behind layers of green fur, said, "I figured I'd see what it's like.